Sorry, I forgot to switch on the recording. Okay, so anyway, the amphiboles are hydrous minerals. Amphiboles are hydrous minerals, which essentially have OH group. So this fluorine component can also be part of the structure in addition to OH. So like OH, the fluorine or halogen component can also be attached. It depends on the fluid availability during the crystallization of these amphiboles, right? So these amphiboles, when they crystallize in the protolith area, if ample amount of halogens are found, then they can be replaced into the structure, right? So in some cases, under very high temperature conditions, high fluorine amphiboles are present, right? For example, in Antarctica, East Antarctica, there are so many locations where you can find high fluorine amphiboles in the rocks, right? So probably you may have heard that the Antarctic and Sri Lankan tectonic situations are similar, East Antarctica and Sri Lanka, right? Because all these terrains were once in part of the Gondwana, right? Gondwana was a process or a supercontinent which was formed as a process called tectonic amalgamation of different continental fragments, right? This happened during the collision of numerous crustal fragments about 550 million years ago, right? So East Antarctica, Sri Lanka, South India, Australia, part of Australia, and East Africa, all these were together after this collision. So West Gondwana and East Gondwana, huge continents at that time, collided at the end of like 550 million years ago and formed a supercontinent called Gondwana. Later on, this supercontinent was splitted as a result of again tectonic activities, some special tectonic activities called mantle plume activities. It was fragmented again and drifted away from each other, and we are still being drifted as a result of that dispersal, right? Gondwana dispersal, that means dismantle or the fragmentation, right? So anyway, high temperature conditions favor the formation of amphiboles, but at the same time you must have high OH group. So the chemistry of amphibole is pretty complicated, where you can see anyway monovalent cations, divalent cations, as well as trivalent cations are in the structure. Okay, right. So always remember, they try to fill like this the ionic assignments in the crystallographic sites, right? Different sites are there, right? Sites means locations in the crystal structure. First, monovalent cations, and any excess monovalent cation will be occupied in the X site. But usually X site is favorable for divalent cations, and Y site is favorable for trivalent cations, but anything in excess which was not available, the space was not enough in the X site can be replaced in the Y site, right? So that's why you have some of these divalent cations also, right? But not all divalent cations will fit into this structure, because it depends on the ionic radius also and valency. So ionic radius to valency ratio is also important, right? It depends on different cations. So it will fit or not fitting will be determined by this ionic ratio. This ratio, that means cationic valency and also the ionic radius of the cation. Okay. So basically you have double chains in pyroxene. So you have one single chain here and another single chain here, right? This is how the double chains are produced. Okay, so we'll see some common types of amphiboles. The common types of amphiboles are, uh, you can see again a triangle. You can continue this triangle up to here, but actually the natural compositions of amphiboles in this range, in this region, cannot be found in the nature. So therefore, we avoid drawing that part, but it doesn't matter. You can draw that part also. So in that case, this segment should go here. It must fit there. Okay. So in the natural environment, again we have some regions where you can find amphiboles, and also some regions where you don't find amphiboles, right? So these blank areas, you don't see any amphibole, right? So again, you have the miscibility gap there, right? A mixing gap or miscibility gap is there because in that region, these elements are, I mean, the amphibole composition does not change. So that means it is immiscible. Okay, immiscible. It does not change. Solid solution behavior uh, does not show in that particular regions like here, right? So basically we have tremolite actinolite series. So here you can see that tremolite actinolite series, where tremolite is the magnesium end member, whereas actinolite is the iron enriched component. But the end member of iron enrichment is called ferroactinolite. Okay, ferroactinolite is called the end member of iron, and magnesium end member of this series is called tremolite. Right. So actually, in between what you have is actinolite. Right. In between you have actinolite. That means both iron and magnesium is there in this tremolite actinolite series. But we used to call it tremolite actinolite series because of iron enrichment is happening in this way. Okay, so these are calcic amphiboles because you have the calcium component as well, right? So we call them calcic amphiboles. High temperature, many high temperature rocks prefer to have this calcic amphibole composition, right? So another series is there, that is anthophyllite grunerite series or cummingtonite anthophyllite series. Sometimes we call cummingtonite anthophyllite series because cummingtonite mineral is another special type of an amphibole like actinolite, but it's having very low amount of calcium. Right, calcium is very low. So anthophyllite is calcium low, magnesium rich amphibole. So grunerite is calcium low, iron rich amphibole, right? So this is the end member. In between, what you have is cummingtonite. That means both magnesium and iron rich amphibole without calcium. Very little amount of calcium, maybe up to 5% maximum, right? Even less than that, right? Yeah, even less than that. So you don't see much calcium in this second series, but in the first series, tremolite actinolite series, usually you can have more than 50% or nearly 50% of calcium, varying from actually 25 to 30, 25 to 50, like uh, some cases, right? But mostly they are having like 20 to 30 percentages of calcium. That's why they are here, right? Very rarely they can be present in this region, but it's very rare, right? But above 50, you never find any amphibole, calcic amphibole. Okay, so this is the general composition of amphibole. So you can see tremolite is more greenish, whereas when it becomes iron rich, it goes towards more blackish, right? But actinolite still green, blackish green is there. but when it goes to very high iron contents, then it's more blackish compositions can be found. You can find amphiboles in brownish colors also. For example, hornblende, right? So it's a common mineral. You may have learned it at your first years. Hornblende is another one type of an amphibole. Okay. Right. So these are double chains, as I mentioned. Basically, they are having two chain structures, two chain structures bonded together. Right. So if you see some cleavages of amphiboles, you can definitely see them in such a way that the angle between the cleavages is almost 120 degree, right? 120 degree cleavage can be found in amphibole, right? In pyroxenes, what you had was 90 degree, right? Nearly 90 degree. But in amphiboles, what you have is nearly 120 degree cleavage. For example, here you can see they are showing 120 degree cleavage. Okay, so it's a set of cleavage. They are parallel cleavage sets. See, they are parallel to each other. This is the cleavage shown by amphibole. So one angle is 60, the other angle is 120, right? So one side you will see 120 and the other side you will see 60 nearly. But usually we refer it as 120 degree cleavage. Okay, 120 degree cleavage. So this is the common type of amphibole that you can find in the nature. Right. Any question? Any question? Right. So in practicals, we will be having some detailed discussions on these minerals. And usually, when you do practicals, you may have to check the extinction angle of these minerals, right? So some amphiboles are showing parallel extinction, and some are inclined extinction, right? So this is also very important because but majority of amphiboles are showing inclined extinction also, right? So the pleochroism to be also used, whether it is a strong pleochroism or not, right? So you will see some different types of amphiboles under the microscope, but basically you will see hornblende, tremolite, or actinolite, right? The other amphiboles, it's not very easy to identify, right? I mean, under the microscope, you need chemistry of that. That means you have to do some EPM, electron microscope analysis or something on your thin section, so that you can get or SEM or whatever, right? You can get some chemical compositions as in terms of peak. In terms of a peak, you can find the chemical composition, right? And another amphibole is there, very specific amphibole, which is showing blue color, right? So we will see if we had a chance in the practical classes to see some of those. They are showing very characteristic bluish appearance, right? Very uncommon thing for amphiboles, because amphiboles are usually greenish or brownish, right? But if you see something very green, very bluish amphibole, then that amphibole must be a special amphibole. And chemically, if you analyze that, you will see it's rich in sodium. Okay, so we call them sodic amphiboles, like sodic pyroxenes we had, right? Remember, we had sodic pyroxenes. Like that, you can have sodic amphibole also. this sodic amphibole also is crystallized under high pressure conditions, right? Under high pressure conditions, sodic amphiboles are found. So you can remember the structure or the chemical formula of amphibole, the common formula. So under high pressure conditions, this excite is getting full of A site is getting full of sodium, plus X site is also getting some increased replacements by sodium, right? The reason is usually this X site is bigger than A site. That's why you have these divalent cations replaced there. So higher ionic radius materials can be replaced there. But under high pressure conditions, what happens? The crystals becomes more stacked, right? More squeezed like, right? So therefore, this ionic radii thing matters there, right? So the some sites become smaller. So in that case, rather than having divalent cations very difficulty replaced into the structure, it's very easy for a monovalent cation to be replaced. So that's why under high pressure conditions, these cations come, monovalent cations come into the divalent sites as well. Right. So anyway, under high pressure conditions, sodium gets more replaced into the amphibole structure. Amphibole structure, and produce a special kind of a amphibole, which is showing very bluish appearance. Okay, so glucophane is such amphibole. Rebecite is another amphibole. Right? Those are sodic amphiboles, sodium-rich amphiboles, sodic amphiboles, glucophane and rebecite. So these are some examples of sodic amphiboles which are formed under high pressure conditions. So how these high pressure conditions are formed in the crust? Tell me someone. How can these high pressure conditions are found? High temperature conditions are found due to collision, right? So high pressure conditions are generated due to subduction of slabs. So one slab is subducting beneath the other, right? So one slab is subducting beneath another slab, right? So this one is going down as a result of heavy density. So what is usually subducting? If you have two different plates, oceanic crust, okay, which is more heavier, so it goes down beneath the continental crust. So this is continental crust, and beneath continental crust, what is subducting is oceanic crust, right? So when it goes to deeper and deeper levels, the materials are also brought by this subducting slab. Materials are also being brought by this subducting slab, sediments and everything, and scraped materials from here. So all these things are going down, right? So they get high temperature conditions as well as high pressure conditions. Since this is subduction, rather than having high temperature conditions, high pressure conditions are prevalent, because no much frictional heat is generated. But of course frictional heat is generated, but not like in collision setting. In subduction setting, what you get is a high pressure, very high pressure conditions, and there you will see these amphiboles or hydrous minerals are produced, which are rich in sodium. Okay, sodium-rich amphiboles are produced in such areas in high subduction zones. Okay, because high pressure conditions are generated due to depth. Because subduction is taking place into more deeper conditions, therefore you have high pressure conditions generated. Okay, right. So subduction prefers these sodic amphibole to produce. Okay. Collision settings prefer calcic amphibole to produce. So these sodic amphiboles do not contain calcium, right? Even if contain very little amount of calcium only. But alkaline elements, sodium is the dominant element there. In addition to iron and magnesium, aluminum, silicon. Now, those are essentially there, but in addition, sodium will be the highly abundant other element, right? So, any questions regarding amphiboles? These are double chain silicates. Okay, now we have covered in the silicate structures. We covered nesosilicate, sorosilicates, cyclosilicates, inosilicates, single chains, and inosilicates, double chains. Inosilicates, double chains. Right. So we came up to this this far. Right. What is remaining is phyllosilicates and tectosilicates, right? Phyllosilicates and tectosilicates. So before going into phyllosilicates and tectosilicates, I will introduce you a special group of minerals, another group of minerals, which is also important, right? That is again inosilicates, but it's not the single, the ones that we have already talked about. That means amphiboles or pyroxenes, right? Single chains, pyroxenes, and double chains, amphiboles. So apart from those two main varieties, you have a minor group under inosilicates, which we call pyroxenoids. Okay, it's not pyroxene, so it's not real pyroxene, so therefore we call it pyroxenoids. The very small, small difference is there. Their inosilicates structure, single chain. So you can see a single chain here. This single chain is little bit distorted, right? This single chain is little bit distorted due to some bond length variation, right? Somewhere in one place in the structure, this bond length is little bit larger, it's longer than the other repeating units. So that makes this inosilicates chain to buckle slightly. So that's why you see some kind of a buckle here, right? So this buckling is a result of this bond length change. That has observed in some pyroxenes, pyroxene looking things, right? Pyroxene looking minerals. Sometimes people used to call them also pyroxene, but actually it's not real pyroxene. It's better to call them pyroxenoids. So every third tetrahedron. So this is 1, 2, 3, right? Every third tetrahedra, you can see this repeating structure, right? So this structure is one, and this structure is another, right? Like that, these structures are repeating. See, these buckled structures are repeating. So this is the nature of the pyroxenoids, right? So these pyroxenoids are purely calcium rich, right? So you can see here, purely calcium rich. So let's just remember the pyroxene structure, the formula. Right, see, this is the pyroxene formula. Okay, XY is a 2O6. XY is a 2O6. For X and Y, usually what we have is sodium, calcium, manganese, ferrous like things. And Y, you have manganese, magnesium, ferric, chromium like divalent and trivalent cations are there, right? But in pyroxenoids, entirely calcium component is enriched. Entirely calcium component is enriched. So unlike pyroxene normal structure, right, where the bond length is very constant, pyroxenoids, what you have difference is this length. This length is little bit longer than in that in pyroxenes, right? So that's why some buckling feature has been introduced to the structure. So that's why we call it pyroxenoids. So in pyroxenoids, you will see some kind of a buccal structure, okay? Some buccal structure, which is due to a little bit increased bond length, right? Some angstrom amount bond length is there. So pyroxene bond length is this much, 5.2 angstrom. But in pyroxenoids, this length is little bit larger. It's 7.1. So that makes this not being very symmetrical, and therefore it gives a buccal structure to the mineral, right? So wollastonite is one of such mineral where its calcium is entirely enriched. So if you can remember the pyroxene triangle, we mentioned that from there onwards there are no pyroxenes, right? Of course, there are pyroxene-looking minerals. That is one of those, wollastonite. So wollastonite plots over here, right? So it's not a real pyroxene. That's why we call that there are no pyroxenes beyond that limit, beyond this limit, upward. Right? But wollastonite, people sometimes call it as a pyroxene also. But actually, it's really speaking, it's not pyroxene. It's a pyroxenoid, right? It's a little deviated from the pyroxene or the normal pyroxene structure, right? Rhodonite is another one. This is that structure. Its bond length is more longer than in the wollastonite. So in wollastonite, every third tetrahedron, 1, 2, 3, every third tetrahedron, you see this repeating structure, right? Every third tetrahedron, you can clearly see this repeating structure. But in rhodonite, every fifth tetrahedron, you can see this repeating structure, buccal structure, right? 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. After every 5, right? After every 5 tetrahedron, what you get is a repeating structure. Okay, so it's rhodonite. So the rhodonite, the composition is manganese. It's entirely manganese replacing pyroxenoid. Okay, so this is a small component which is deviating from the pyroxene structure. So therefore, we call it pyroxenoid. So under pyroxenoids, we have mainly wollastonite and rhodonite. The difference between wollastonite and rhodonite is the repeating buccal structure. So every third tetrahedron, wollastonite has a repeating structure, but rhodonite has the repeating structure or repeating buccal structure every fifth tetrahedron. Okay, so that's the difference in these two minerals, which we call pyroxenoids. Okay, so they plot at this end, but in the case of rhodonite, we can't plot it in this triangle because it is manganese rich. We usually don't put manganese into this triangle because manganese is not found in very abundant quantities in other varieties of pyroxenes. Only in this rhodonite you have this manganese. That's why. Okay, it's just specific for manganese. So if you want to show that one, so you can put manganese here in this triangle. Or otherwise you can put as calcium or manganese like that, comma manganese, right? When you represent this triangle, that's okay, right? So that is pyroxenoid. So usually pyroxenoids which are not very stable, right? Pyroxenoids are not very stable because of this problem. right? Because of this structural problem. It's actually defect. It's a structural defect. So therefore, they want to stabilize themselves by breaking down, right? So some reactions can take place due to because of that. So in the environment, you have a lot of carbon dioxide. So with carbon dioxide, this wollastonite composition, this pyroxenoid composition reacts. It's a solid. That's why it's a mineral. So it reacts with carbon dioxide and form calcium carbonate. Right? You know calcium carbonate. It's a solid again. And quartz. It produces quartz and calcium carbonate. That means it dissociates to calcium carbonate and silica, quartz. So that produces under surface conditions, right? So in general, this is a exothermic reaction, right? It's negative, delta G negative. So that means that this reaction goes in right hand side, right? It prefers going this right hand side rather than left hand side. To if you want to make it to produce the wollastonite out of calcium carbonate and SiO2 or silica quartz, you have to heat this mixture. So you can take this mixture in similar proportions, in similar molar proportions. You have 1 mole here, right? I hope this is balanced. Yeah, it's balanced. So you can have 1 mole of calcium carbonate and 1 mole of SiO2 mixed together and make it very well mixed and then heat it. So what happens is CO2 is released while calcium CaSiO3 is produced. That means wollastonite is produced. Okay, so usually it goes to the right. That means it's a breakdown reaction, right? So wollastonite will break down if exposed to CO2. Usually, this wollastonite, when found in rocks, is exposed to the environment. That means carbon dioxide is available. So it gradually reacts forming calcium carbonate. So in wollastonite present rocks, you may see some kind of limey structure, textures, lime structure, right? Hunu gatiyak thiyena. Some lime nature you can find. Okay, so this is a special group you can consider as under inosilicates, which is a little bit defected crystal, right? Wollastonite is a defected crystal structure, lattice. Okay, right. So these are some examples of the images of wollastonite and rhodonite. This is wollastonite and this is rhodonite. Okay, this is wollastonite and rhodonite. There you can see these two types of pyroxenoid compositions. Rhodonite is very pinkish. It's a very beautiful mineral, while wollastonite is very pure white. Okay, you can see some crystals like, and also you can see some near 90-degree cleavages, right? So see very faint cleavages you can see, but they are perfect cleavages, right? If you see with a hand lens, you will see them arranged in 90-degree, right? Two sets of cleavages can be found because it looks like a pyroxene. It's almost a pyroxene. Only thing is it's a slightly the defect, the crystal is defected. Okay, right, even here you might find some 90-degree cleavage. So these are pyroxenoids, right? Okay, any questions up to that? So we completed the inosilicate part last week and today. Pyroxenes which are having single chains, and you can see the composition like here. and you don't see any OH group there, right? Any OH group or any halogen. You don't see any OH or halogen there in pyroxene. So we call them, therefore, anhydrous minerals. So pyroxenes are anhydrous minerals because water component is not at all there. Right? But in contrast, what you have in amphiboles is OH group attached. Right? In addition to its complex chemistry, having 3 types of cation replacements, you have anions also replaced as OH or halogen. Right? So these are essential components, but halogen might not be there, but OH must be an essential part in these amphiboles. Halogen can also be there, but it's not an essential part. If OH is not there, then there will be no longer pyroxene is available. Okay, so this is the difference between the 2 types of inosilicates, single chains and double chains. Okay. Right. So pyroxenoid is the defected structure which we can find in wollastonite or rhodonite. Right. Those are the 2 pyroxenoids that we can see in the nature easily. So if you don't have any other questions, do you have questions? So remember, high pressure varieties are also there for amphiboles also. Right? Amphiboles, what is the high pressure variety? Blue or rebecite. Those are showing very blue colors. So you can search in Google when you have free time and check their appearance. Very beautiful bluish color is found. Okay, so I will introduce the phyllosilicates also. The next group that we have to study. You see, phyllosilicates. Yeah, this is the phyllosilicates, right? So, what are the phyllosilicates? They belong, I mean, mica and phlogopite like mica, muscovite, phlogopites, all the mica group, biotite, all these belong to phyllosilicates. So what's the special feature of these phyllosilicates? As you can see here in the structure, it's like a very flat, right? Because of this silicon tetrahedra coordination together, it makes like a sheet-like structure, right? It's a sheet-like structure, right? So multiple layers of these sheets are joined together, right? Multiple layers, right? Like this. Multiple layers are joined together, right? With a very weak bond. So we can remove these sheets one by one because of this weak bonding. You can remove this layer out and you can remove this another layer and you can remove another layer like that, right? So it's like a pages in a book, right? It's like a pages in a book, right? You can remove pages one by one, right? So this structure is a sheet structure. We call it a sheet structure, and therefore they are not very robust. They are easily broken, right? They are easily broken through these layers. So therefore these are called sheet silicates also, right? So phyllosilicates or sheet silicates are these ones. So you know thalassominera, right? Have you heard thalassominera? That is mica, right? This mica can easily be removed layer by layer. Biotite, they can be removed by layer or muscovite. It's very easy, right? Because they are weakly bonded. So these are cyclosilicates or sheet silicates. Okay, so there what you have is alternating tetrahedral and octahedral layers, right? Tetrahedral and octahedral layers, that means different layers, 2 types of layers are bonded together. So they are bonded together with a cation, right? So in between these two layers, you can find a cation weakly bonded, right? For example, potassium. It's the common, the most common cation in between these layers is potassium, right? That's why to produce biotite, you need potassium essentially, right? Potassium is a must, right? So this is how you have these sheet silicates, mica group, and also talc, the mineral talc, you know, the least hardness mineral. That is also a sheet silicate. And some other minerals, lizardite, kaolinite, that's a clay mineral, and pyrophyllite, muscovite, phlogopite, biotite. All these are sheet silicates, phyllosilicates. So weak electrostatic bonds are there in between. That means here very weak electrostatic bonds are there. So you can see the stacked layers of these sheets, right? In the biotite structure. This is biotite, right? So if you want, you can remove these layers one by one, right? You can remove these layers one by one very easily, right? So this is common for these sheet silicates or phyllosilicates. So in mica structure, you can see different sheets are bonded together, right? We call interlayer cation, right? Interlayer cation. TOT, TOT means tetrahedral, octahedral, tetrahedral, octahedral. So tetrahedral layer and octahedral layer, right? Again tetrahedral layer. So alternatively, they are bonded together, right? And this one single layer, once formed by this TOT structure, it will be attached to a cation. It will be attached to a cation, actually in between another layer, TOT layer, right? So in between only you have this cation. So muscovite is an example of this formula, and there also you can see some OH group is there. So mica or biotite is also hydrous mineral that it means. So definitely OH group should be there, but halogen might not be there, right? Halogen can also be there, but it's not essential. All the other elemental configuration is a must. So for these cationic replacements, right? These cationic replacements, you can have either magnesium, iron, aluminium. All these things can be replaced together. Okay. Calcium, magnesium, divalent cations. If you take divalent cations, calcium, magnesium, iron, ferrous can be there, right? In these different minerals. So in muscovite, you don't see much magnesium and iron or calcium, right? So it's found in aluminium-rich sediments. It's found in aluminium-rich sediments. Aluminium-rich sediments, that means argillaceous sediments. We call it argillaceous sediments, where aluminium-rich sediments are predominant. Okay, but biotite like phyllosilicates, you have magnesium and iron mainly, right? Less amount of aluminium is there. Aluminium is there, but less amount. Okay, right. So some of the common phyllosilicates you can see here, and also you can just focus on this table here. You can see the mica group that we just talked about. Okay, this is the mica group, and in this mica group, you can see different minerals: muscovite, phlogopite, biotite, lepidolite, and margarite. Right? Those are the mica family. Different mica minerals are there. That is mica family. Right? So you can compare their compositions, compare their chemistries. Right? OH is a must. Right? OH is a must. Aluminium is also there. Aluminium silicate, that unit is also there. Only thing is these cations are changing, right? Basically, potassium is also essential. Then this aluminum, magnesium, iron replacement can be there. Sometimes lithium can also come into the structure, especially lepidolite. Lithium is there. In margarite, calcium is coming in addition to aluminum, silicon, but no potassium or magnesium, iron elemental compositions there. So in muscovite, you have potassium and aluminum. In other biotite and other micas, you have potassium and magnesium or iron. And lepidolite, you have in addition lithium instead of magnesium and iron. In margarite, instead of magnesium, iron, and potassium, what you have is calcium. Okay, so this is how this mica group is formed. And in addition to those, you have chloride group. The mineral chloride is there. That is also phyllosilicate. Okay, but you can see its structure is very complex, right? The chemistry is very complex, chloride, but still OH group must be there, right? These are hydrous minerals. And you can have talc, you can have talc and pyrophyllite. These are some minerals, okay? And clay mineral group, kaolinite, you can have kaolinite. Actually, this talc, pyrophyllite, kaolinite, they also come into the clay mineral group. Okay. And then what you have is serpentinite, a serpentine group. There you have anticorite, chrysolite, anticorite, chrysotile, and lizardite. These are the common minerals you can find in serpentine group. Right? In the serpentine group, the special feature is it's rich in magnesium. It's magnesium-rich composition. Okay, it's magnesium-rich composition. So some images you can see here: anticorite, chrysotile. Chrysotile is like asbestos-like thing, right? It's a fibrous. Kaolinite, talc, pyrophyllite. All these are fibrous, mainly fibrous. Okay, muscovite, common muscovite, and lepidolite. And what you have is here is biotite, right? In addition, you have chloride and prehnite. Prehnite is another one, another type of phyllosilicate. Prehnite, pumpylite, there is another one, pumpylite also, right? Prehnite structure is here. Okay. So these prehnite, pumpylite, like these ones are very low temperature minerals. They prefer low temperature conditions to form. Right, and you can see the compositional triangle of micas. Muscovite, it's aluminum rich end member, and anite. Anite is a biotite series. One type of biotite is anite, iron rich biotite, and magnesium rich biotite, or the mica we call phlogopite, right? That is magnesium rich one. So this anite phlogopite composition we usually term as biotite series. Okay, biotite series. And the other extreme end member is muscovite, which does not have iron and magnesium. That's why it has gone to this end, right? It does not have magnesium and iron. So that means aluminum rich sediments can produce muscovite, but not biotite. So to produce biotite, you must have more mafic compositions. More mafic composition means more iron and magnesium rich compositions. Understand? Okay, this is the composition of phyllosilicates. So in between, in the central part, you don't see any kind of a mica mineral. So that means there is a miscibility gap existing. Miscibility gap is existing there, where you don't see any mica composition in between. So in the nature, you don't find micas in between. Like in pyroxenes, you had miscibility gap, and in hornblende or in amphipoles you had. Now you can see in phyllosilicates also, in micas also, miscibility gap is there, right? So that means under solid solution conditions, they are not mixing together each other. They are not mixing each other. Okay. So today we considered inosilicates, double chains, and inosilicates single chain but special group, that is pyroxenoids, right? So amphiboles and pyroxenoids we considered today mainly, and then we came up with the phyllosilicate structures as well. So under phyllosilicates, these groups are important, right? These groups are important, so you have to keep in mind these different types of groups. So this group should be remembered. The compositions or the formulas you don't have to remember, but you need to know the composition at least, right? Whether it is iron rich or whether it is magnesium rich or whether it is lithium or calcium, whatever like that, you should know with respect to these mineral compositions. So that is very, very important. Okay. Right. So I think if you have any questions, you can post just now. Do you have any questions regarding this? For mica formation also, the physical conditions, usually moderate pressure temperature conditions are preferred. Okay, not very high temperature pressures, but moderate pressure temperatures are preferred because this is also a hydrous mineral, you know. Once if you have a lot of high temperature conditions, then all these micas are getting unstable. Instability field is there, right? So that means they are not stable under high temperature conditions because hydrous or the OH group can be removed from their structure. So that's the reason. Okay. So do you have any questions? So I will take one more lecture. So by that I can finish. That means in the next week, I will take a whole 2-hour lecture and finish this content. Okay, descriptive mineralogy part will be over by that time, right? So always remember you have to study parallelly optical mineralogy part and descriptive mineralogy part because for you to understand the petrogenesis or the petrology in the next semester, this knowledge is very important, right? So we will finish the descriptive mineralogy part in the next week, and I don't know, the calendar, your academic calendar will be revised, I think, at today's faculty board meeting. So then there may be some changes to your academic calendar, and we'll see how the university is going to proceed, right? Whether you can come over here physically to do practicals and other things, or not, right? So we can we will inform you. I think Dean sir will inform you in due course. Okay, so I will finish here for today.